Welcome back. It's time for hashtag Africa Focus features, part of the show where we focus on some of the biggest stories on the African continent and the conversations that are happening through the length and breadth of our beautiful continent. And this time around, we'll be focusing on Rwanda, where 32 years ago, the scars of one of the most tragic events on the continent took place. Yesterday marked Kwibuka32, the annual commemoration of the Rwandan genocide, where an estimated 100,000 people, mostly Tutsis, were killed in just 100 days. This year, the African Union is leading renewed calls for never again, a phrase that has echoed through decades, yet continues to be tested by ongoing conflicts and mass atrocities in different parts of the continent and in different parts of the world. So, what does remembrance mean in 2026? Has Africa and the international community truly internalized the lessons of 1994 Rwanda? And to help us reflect and interrogate this moment, we're joined by Rwanda-based journalist Athan Tashobya. Brother Athan, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to News and Views. Really appreciate you giving us your time.
And thanks for having me. Thank you so much. Good morning from Kigali.
There we go. And I think we'll jump right into it. It's a very, very significant day today. I mean, it's a very significant week. I can say it's very significant month and a very significant year for the people of Rwanda. Kwibuka32. What does it represent for Rwandans on the ground? What are the conversations, especially for a younger generation, the Gen Zs, that did not directly experience the atrocities of 1994?
Kwibuka, it means a moment to pause from everything and pay tribute to over 1 million people that perished in 1994, genocide against the Tutsi. Kwibuka is to honor those who died and to also pay tribute to the survivors who endured 100 days of horrific persecution, killing, being hunted to die, some spending days in the bushes and all that. So it's a moment for Rwanda and the international community to look itself in the mirror and say, where did we fail? And how can we make sure that what happened in Rwanda 32 years ago never happens again? And that was largely the message that was being shared by, the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, yesterday at the launch of the 100 days of commemoration at the National Week of Mourning as well. That will go until the 13th of April. So that's largely what happened. And the messages that were being shared across, including the message that was shared by the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. Let's look back and make sure that things that didn't go right in regards to stopping the genocide never happens again. But it's a somber mood in the country. The radio waves all are playing the commemoration songs. There's no such a thing like entertainment for the next 1 week. It's such a somber mood. It takes you back to exactly, it gives you an idea of what was happening in this country 32 years ago.
One thing that I'm really, really interested in finding out is how the commemorations have evolved over the years. How is Rwanda marking this anniversary differently, if at all, compared to the other previous milestones? Because Rwanda has evolved since 1994. There's been different phases of what the country has become. From your perspective, how has the commemorations of this genocide evolved over the years? How has it been done differently, and how is it being done differently today?
I think back in years it was largely about uh, you know sorrows, crying, reflecting on things that happened. But now, with years going on, it's more of renewing and remembering, but uniting to build a nation. And people are encouraged to look forward, look back with a sense of never should it happen again, but also look forward into rebuilding a united nation. And how do you pay tribute to those that were lost and people that survived, especially? Is you rebuild yourself, and that's the whole idea of remember, unite, renew, and rebuild yourselves in that sense. And people are encouraged to look forward, not forgetting what happened, but rebuilding themselves and making sure that they do not um, sort of give a reason for the perpetrators to celebrate, especially on the side of the survivors, but to be sure that they are rebuilding themselves there, but also making sure that the elements of unity and reconciliation are entrenched further into the communities of Rwanda.
No,
Yeah,
most
yeah,
definitely. And
yeah.
I think that's a very, very important point that you're making. There are others, critics, if I can call them that are arguing that remembrance has, in some cases, become very, very symbolic, rather than being transformative, if I can put it that way. Do you see that risk in Rwanda, where the prevention mechanisms of what happened in 1994 are not necessarily put in place, and it's just symbolic? It's just people remembering their loved ones that unfortunately perished because of this genocide, and the government in essence is not putting in the right measures, the proper measures, to make sure that never again really does become never again, not just for Rwanda, but for Africa as a whole, for Rwanda to set an example for a continent that is still honestly plagued by a lot of these squabbles between different tribes or people of different races or different religious dominions across the African continent.
Critics are there. I mean, it's just 32 years ago. It's not like 100 years ago. And
Mm,
critics are the people who were in one way or another involved in committing or perpetrating or planning the genocide. Some are still at large, and
mm,
there are some that are sort of pushing the genocide ideology in the region. I think the president mentioned it. Uh, some people are actually, for your own information, there's some people who committed the genocide and are serving their sentences in prison. Some have finished their sentences. Others are still at large in the region, in the neighboring countries, in the DRC, and other countries. I think you've heard about the FDR, which are formerly largely the remnants of the people who committed the genocide. So there are going to be those critics and saying that the way it's being done is not the right way it's being done,
mm,
for different reasons. So those critics are going to be there, and the genocide ideology is still largely in the region, hovering over those who survived. Someone who was 10 years ago is probably 40 years ago. Someone who was 15 how many, close to 50 years ago, and those people understand, were really understanding. So you will understand that the Rwandan authorities, the survivors here, are going to fight a genocide ideology, but also making sure that those people who are, committed or have cases to answer are sort of running away from it. And in doing so, they're going to say the way it's done is not the right way it's done. But what is the right way to
mm,
remember? What is the right way to fight the genocide ideology? Is to remember, is to make sure that people continue to recount the stories that happened and sort of inform or educate those that were not there. So that's the whole, and this is something, and if you go into genocide studies, this is one of the things that happen at a later date of the genocide, and that's genocide denial, and that
mm,
sort of is confronted with, remembering and honoring the genocide ideology. But again, the international community has a duty to make sure that some of these things that we saw 30 years ago, not even in Rwanda, but in other countries where genocide has happened, is, is confronted. But again and again, we see the international community continue to fail. So anyways, those are the challenges that exist, and those are challenges that were being talked about, especially yesterday at the launch of the commemoration, and we will continue to hear that. And today we're actually going to be having listening to some international experts at the genocide conference on genocide, and to understand the root causes and how the world can actually combat such ideologies, and try to
mm.
lay the foundation to never again.
You mentioned something quite important, reconciliation. Can you give us insight on what that project looks like for the people of Rwanda 30 plus years on? And also the issue of justice. The Rwandan genocide is often cited as a case study for post conflict recovery. How sustainable has that project been? And are we seeing signs and shoots of justice and the reconciliation process? I think as a South African, I'm very interested in, because there's a history that we have that is in the number of years that have passed is not that far from Rwanda, and we're still struggling a lot with the reconciliation project. From Rwanda's perspective, what does that look like?
I think from the moment that the authorities took over power and there was a bit of, restraint stopping people from revenging, that was, I think, a huge step. If you look at it, a huge step. Don't revenge. Let's rebuild. Let's understand who committed the genocide, who organized it. There's, putting the difference between someone who committed it out of coercion and someone who was actually planned it, and then they serve different sentences. But also, if you accept that, hey, I killed your relative, and this is why I buried, and then you have from that moment, the moment you give someone closure, and then they give their loved ones some decent burial, and
Mm,
then you serve a sentence, and you come back, and they rebuild. They have built different communities here in Rwanda where perpetrators and survivors live side by side, especially if you knew each other and you lived in the same neighborhood. You killed my husband, my wife, you killed my children, but because you actually opened up and said, look, I did this because of this, and this is where they are buried. I was in this group of the killers, and probably I did not kill, but I was coerced into being part of this.
mm,
So that's the message that has gone on over the years. And this year, thousands of genocide convicts are finishing their sentences and being reintegrated in their communities, but with a sense of saying, look, we regret what happened, but we come back to join the people to rebuild the nation. That's where Rwanda's reconciliation is. From the moment the authorities that took over power in 1994 said we're not going to revenge, but rather bring people together. I think that was the huge foundation of what has followed 32 years ago, later, of rebuilding and making sure that people are intentionally reconciling, and those who committed the genocide are seeking forgiveness. From Gachacha, some people actually ended up serving their sentences, but with the sense of closure. I've asked for forgiveness. I've reached out to the family of those I killed. And the other
mm,
person has actually got to know that, my relative, my loved one is buried here or was dumped here, and then they get the bodies and given decent burial. And that's the reconciliation that we are continue to see, and the forgiveness and the closure that continues to happen 32 years later here in Rwanda.
There you have it. Thank you so much, my brother, for joining us. And Dibuzongere Ukundi, really appreciate you giving us your time.
I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
There we go. That has been a hashtag Africa Focus feature focusing on Rwanda and the remembrance of that genocide that happened 32 years ago. And I think just zooming out, it's very, very interesting and concerning for me the fact that we're currently seeing conflicts in parts of Africa, places like Sudan, places like the DRC, Gaza, for instance. And you'd think that the international community would be applying some of the lessons of Rwanda, but it looks like we are witnessing similar patterns of inaction, similar patterns of non accountability, of zero tolerance of each other, really. And it paints a really, really concerning picture of the future, because Rwanda, I think, is the perfect template of the worst of humankind, but also after that, the best of humankind. As you heard there, that there are communities living side by side where the perpetrators of this genocide and the victims of it, or the survivors of it, are forgiven each other. They've moved past it. And if there are no lessons that could be taken from that, then I think we're really doomed as a people, as the human race. But otherwise, from me, Salilo, everyone here at Salam Media, to the people of Rwanda. We're with you during this time, during this days of mourning, days of remembrance, for a day that will surely leave a mark on the history of Africa, the history of the world. And it's a mark that we should all be learning from and taking a page out of. Otherwise, going to take a quick break. News and views continues after this.